Listen, are you with me, right? Today's the day, man. I don't care. We take your plan out.
Okay, man.
Mess it up.
Relax, I got it.
For today's ruthless killers, getting away with murder has never been so hard.
You ready, Brian? He's going down. We're doing it now.
You got it.
Even the most perfectly coordinated killing will leave behind a trail of telltale clues. No matter how thorough and flawless the cover-up, forensic experts almost always link a crime scene back to the killers.
Ultimately, criminals think that they can cover this up, they can bury their evidence, they can destroy their evidence, but there is no such thing as a perfect crime.
In order to completely destroy a body and effectively hide it, you need a lot of heat and therefore a lot of wood.
Probably many of these people are never discovered in the stomachs of sharks because the fisher simply aren't looking for them.
The rewarding part of the job is basically figuring out what's happened to an individual, especially when someone tries to cover it up.
Killers will try virtually anything in an effort to dispose of evidence. But often, forensic science is a lot smarter than they are. The plot to get rid of a co-worker plays out as planned.
This guy's You're taking care of him later, right?
Yeah, we're doing it.
It seems like the perfect murder. Only now the killers are faced with the task of cleaning up and getting rid of the evidence. In places like Florida, heat, humidity, and wildlife can be murder on a body. A corpse dumped in the right location can literally vanish in hours. Sergeant Sanford Shirk is supervisor of the Forensic Science Unit in Martin County, Florida.
In the South Florida environment, it doesn't take a lot of time for a body to decompose and ultimately disappear. So as investigators, time is of the essence. And in the swamps, obviously, and here in Florida, we have all types of varieties of reptiles, turtles, and fish, as well as alligators. Alligators can certainly dismember a human body in a short period of time. And criminal minds seek out these areas and plan their criminal activity to use the natural elements that we have here in South Florida.
July 1999. Sergeant Shirk and his colleagues are called to the grisly murder of a female victim. Her mangled remains are found floating in a canal by passing fishermen.
This is the Rundle-Shop Bridge where the victim lost her life. And it was just a few years ago that she was placed into this canal and floated downstream where her body was found. And this place, every time you come back, those thoughts and all the leads and the jury, their faces, all come back to one's mind.
Tracing back and piecing together who she is, how she died, and who could have done this is a challenging task for Shirk and the investigators.
Oftentimes, the crime scene and the dump site is two different places. So we had the body recovery site, the dump site in the canal, and at that point we realized that it was important to find out where the crime scene took place.
Slowly but surely, they begin to unravel the truth.
As you can see here, this is an asphalt road that stops here at the sand, and over about this area here, there was a spot probably 6 to 8 inches in circumference. We'd actually did a hemodent test on it, tested positive for blood. Over the sand area, we found a spot that looked to be a burned out area. We started kind of sifting through it. We found bits of what appeared to be burnt clothing, burnt jeans, and possibly human hair.
The victim is identified as 19-year-old Anadeli Macedo Marino. Using clues at the dump site, police compile a profile of her killer.
The suspect that we developed was about 5'4", probably 130 pounds, and it was just a personal feeling, but when I got here, I felt like whoever did it, I just had a feeling they were weak or small. It just appeared like they couldn't just heave a human body and carry it at one time, and it looked like they had to kind of start and stop along the way.
In his attempts to dispose of her body, Anadeli's killer resorts to some extreme measures.
Well, he tried several things. The burning actually took place back in this area, is where the fire was, and that did not work. And he ultimately realized that he cannot burn up this body and it's just not going to go away. And so he had to resort to a secondary thought, which was to dispose of the body into the waterway.
A grisly trail of drag marks leads investigators straight to the canal. A canal teeming with alligators. The trauma and scavenging devastated Anadeli's remains. Alligators had removed some of her limbs. Burn marks and bloating of her corpse made her virtually unrecognizable.
Another day in the water, she would have been gone. We never would have found her. She would have. The gator would have taken care of the evidence. I mean, we never would have found the body. It'd be another missing person, and we probably never proved it.
But her body is discovered. Clues and witnesses lead police straight to her killer, 17-year-old Miguel Del Campo, Anadeli's neighborhood friend.
This would have been almost a perfect crime. It goes back to the body. I mean, if the body would have been gone, we would have a suspect, really nothing to tie him up with.
When I worked these cases, I ultimately realized that it's God who said, "Thou shalt not kill." Now, who is there to stand up for the one that has fallen? So it's my job to go forward, find the clues, and bring that person to justice.
Del Campo's attempt at a cover-up fails. One more day, and he may have gotten away with murder. But was he just unlucky? Certainly, scavengers can destroy crime scene evidence. Could they also trick investigators into thinking these predators were the cause of death?
Here he comes! Now! Here! He's coming around here!
Relying on scavengers to get rid of evidence may seem like a good way to cover up a murder. After all, bodies of water are massive, and there are plenty of man-eating animals out there.
We have victims who ultimately end up in the ocean and can very well often float ashore. And when they come ashore, they often have scavenger indication on them. And sometimes limbs are missing, and we can tell from the injuries on the body that sharks have been feeding on the corpse. Sometimes it's very difficult to identify those because we don't have the entire body or we don't have identifying features on that body, such as tattoos or fingerprints or maybe the soles of the feet that we could positively identify.
George Burgess has been studying shark behavior for over 20 years.
Common conception on sharks is that they're basically scavengers that will eat anything put in front of them. That's not really true, but most sharks are fairly particular.
Gators, on the other hand, are not quite as fussy. John Brugan is a top alligator specialist.
If it's meat, they're usually going to try and eat it. So eating a person is not something that they're going to shy away from, but at the same time, there's too much in the average person for them to eat all at once. So if it's one alligator finds a body in the water, he might be able to eat an arm, maybe 2 arms, and that's going to be pretty much a full meal for that animal. So he's either going to take that body and try and stash it somewhere else where he can come back for it later when he's digested a little bit, or he's just going to leave it be.
Turns out getting rid of a body has a lot to do with geography and chance. Different species operate in different waters, and not all scavengers are created equally.
As nasty as it may sound, a human being in the ocean simply becomes part of the food chain. And how long a body lasts in the water and how much of it is left is dependent, of course, upon how many animals are in the area. And sharks are not uniformly distributed. So if a body happens to be in an area where there's abundance, a body can be ravished very quickly, and the loss of tissue very significant in a rapid manner. On the other hand, in certain areas where sharks are not very common, particularly in cold water environments where sharks are much less common, a body may not have any shark damage for a long period of time, or if it does suffer it, not very much.
Size also plays a role in damage to a body. Small animals take small bites. Big animals, big bites.
One American alligator by itself is not going to be able to consume a whole body. It's too much food and going to take too long to do it. A group of alligators are probably going to do their best to eat as much as they can. If a lot of the clothes, if there's clothes involved, are going to be left over. There would be evidence like they don't digest teeth very well, so the enamel on the teeth kind of protects them, and that would be passed through the alligator system. Any metal like jewelry, rings, glasses, things like that are going to pass through their system. With what I know of American alligators, it's probably the last thing I'd try to do to get rid of a body. They don't destroy enough evidence to make it worth your while.
To the trained eye, bite marks leave indicators that reveal much information. Dr. Charles Diggs is a medical examiner and leading expert in animal bite marks.
Sharks generally, when they bite you, the teeth are very sharp, and they produce a tearing type of appearance, and it's very distinct. You can look at a body and then say, you can say almost immediately that's a shark bite.
So a killer counting on scavengers learns a hard lesson. The bite marks and any bleeding or hemorrhaging around them will also tell investigators whether the person was alive or dead when bitten. What's left behind can be crucial to the investigation.
Many times the important parts may not be there after a scavenge. As you can imagine, where the shark bites in the scavenge and what's left of the human body is very important. And oftentimes the smoking gun that a medical examiner is looking for can't be found simply because the shark has taken it with him.
Alligators have amazing power in their jaws, even higher than things like lions and hyenas. So they have the ability to crush bone. So if there was a corpse or a body with damage like knife cuts or bullet wounds, in the process of chewing up or trying to tear off pieces, they're going to do a lot of damage to that evidence.
But if the body parts are still there, the bite marks won't fool the examiner.
Sometimes you may have a knife wound that can be covered up by a shark bite. But once again, once you open the body and inspect it carefully, you can see wound track marks.
Though external injuries may look like bite marks, internally there are major differences.
Stab wounds obviously is a lot different from a bite mark because you don't get the penetration that you will get when someone stabs you with a knife. So you can actually trace the knife wound down inside the body itself. Very often, people who are trying to cover up their criminal activity on the body by throwing it in a lake or a pond that contains alligators, thinking that alligators are going to destroy it, they're very disappointed.
For crime scene investigators, these big predators must be taken into consideration. Not just for the dead, also for the living.
Just take it slow. Yeah, just slow, and so we don't stir up the water. Okay.
It's always interesting to try and recover a body from the habitat of wildlife that you know has a taste for humanity.
I probably want to get some photographs of the body from this position. Just hold it right here.
So it causes a bit of alarm, security. You need to react, be smart, and not overextend yourself to the point that you become vulnerable to that wildlife. We know right here in this area that you know, the alligators that are here, we don't want to have any conflict with them. We're in their habitat, and so they're not happy that we're here.
A shark is I suppose, a killer's best friend in the ocean. But sharks very rarely will consume an entire human being, and that, I think, is the catch. While parts of the body may be removed, usually there's enough left to make identification, and then in many cases there's enough left to develop cause of death as well. So it's no certainty that if you deposit a dead body in the ocean, that it's not going to come back to haunt you.
The ever-evolving quest to get away with murder. Some killers turn to nature. Others take a more hands-on approach. For some murderers, killing comes easy.
He's nothing but a big mouth.
It's getting rid of the evidence and masking the victim's identity that presents the greater challenge. Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Roger Mittelman has seen it all.
Criminals conceal their crimes by the usual things people think about. In other words, by burning the bodies and hoping that nothing will be found, or by taking the bodies and putting it in a body of water or putting it in a ditch. These are the usual ways people try to conceal that a murder has occurred, but there are more unusual ways as well.
In 1995, Dr. Mittelman was called in to help unravel one of the most thorough cover-up attempts Miami had ever seen. Killers working an extortion and kidnapping scheme abducted a wealthy couple, chopped their bodies to pieces, and dumped the remains throughout the county.
Well, in the Garriga case, we found the torsos first in the 55-gallon drums, and then later on, the skulls and portions of the hands and feet were found in smaller buckets in a different area of the Dade County geography.
In their gruesome attempt to hide the victims' identities, the killers cut off their heads, hands, and feet. They also sawed off their faces. Though the bodies were severely damaged, certain parts could still provide clues. Once investigators knew who the victims were, it wasn't long before they tracked down the killers. Noel Doorbal and Daniel Lugo.
Now, when the skulls turned up later, we were then able to do other things. Obviously, the age, race, and sex anthropologically was that of the victims, but what had happened was they had cut the faces out of the skull, but they got sloppy. They got sloppy in the sense that one tooth was left in the male skull. That tooth had a filling, we had his dental records, and then we were able to say, that's him. By association, that's her.
Breast implants and an IUD found in the female victim confirm her identity. What seemed like the perfect crime put Doorbal and Lugo on death row. Their cover-up blown out of the water.
Criminals go to great lengths to destroy and cover up their physical evidence. However, there is no perfect crime. Ultimately, no matter how a criminal goes to great lengths of destroying their evidence, they always leave some little insignificant thing behind. So if you remove the hands in order to conceal the identity, surely you have forgotten about the hip replacement that has a serial number that is buried deep within a body, or maybe breast implants who have serial numbers, and those are all traceable, and we can ultimately very easily find a victim.
But what if the remains are buried deep under snow? What about a crime scene in the dead of winter?
Well, basically, ever since time began, man was killing man, and they seem to come up with more inventive ways as time progresses. The thing that we're finding now, we find killers that are burying their victims in shallow graves. They are leaving them on the side of the road. They're burning them to try and conceal the crime. They're drowning them. There's a wide variety out there. The imagination of the criminal is a good one. That's why it's important for police officers to come up with ways to catch them that are even more inventive.
Greg Olson is a police platoon commander and leader of an elite archaeological forensic recovery team in Ontario. Winter recoveries are among the team's specialties. Though a blanket of snow may hide a body from view, it won't stop investigators from searching.
Okay, that's it. When I refer to winter recoveries, it's something that has to be done. Our homicide investigators are very intent on us trying to locate as much of the human remains as we can. It's not a situation that we can put off till the spring. It's something that has to be done and has to be done right away, within reason. If we can locate and remove the main part of the deceased, then that's great. So what we try and do is gather as much information of the deceased, much of the remains of the deceased as we can, and any evidence that would be there that would otherwise be carried away by animals between the time we leave and come back in the spring.
Specialized tents and heaters help thaw out the dump site.
Okay, let's move over this way. Shut the door. Keep some of the heat in. Okay, this is basically the bulk of it, so let's start back over here. Let's work our way east. When we're thinking about logistics and recovering human remains in the four seasons, obviously in non-winter scenes, it's much easier for us to not only to do the excavations, but to locate what we're looking for.
Team members comb the site, marking the tiniest fragments of evidence.
That's the main bone pile here anyway.
Looks like there's quite a bit of burning on this.
Mm-hmm. For a scene like today, we're going to have to try and locate the main scene, set up a tent, melt the snow, get rid of the surface litter, and try and recover as much as we can. Almost looks like they tried to set this guy on fire.
Yeah, there's a bit more over here.
With the snow removed, the crime scene begins to reveal its secrets.
And again, I don't see trauma at this point, but if you look at the surface, you can see that there are leaves under the jeans, but there's also leaves on top. Yeah. So that's also in inclement weather like we have on days like today with the snowfall. We have to really pull out all the stops. Our homicide investigators are, again, very keen to recover as much as they can to locate trauma, to locate identification, determine sexual affinity, that kind of thing, age, race, stature, that kind of thing.
In order to deconstruct the crime scene, the team divides the area into a series of grids.
Put one in here at the 3 meter.
Mapping above and below the surface.
Oh, good. Right here. Yep. Right there. Oh, show us Casey. I don't want to disturb that too much.
So there's that and the casing of Joe's square.
Today, we've had some tremendous luck by using this system. It's simple to employ. It's painstaking. You take your officers off the road for a given amount of time, but if it's worth doing, it's worth doing well. The way the laws are, you only get one good kick at the can, so let's do it. Let's do it right. Let's do it properly.
In their attempt to destroy all signs of a murder, some killers try and burn the evidence. But even the hottest fire will leave clues in the ashes. A raging fire has amazing destructive powers. It can engulf a room in a matter of minutes. Understanding what it can do to a human body is critical for crime scene investigators. Anthropologist Mariah Liston is an expert in cremated human remains, or cremains.
It takes a lot of calories of heat to get a body to catch fire and then burn away, and so you have to have a large quantity of fuel. For an average adult body, it takes about 2 cubic meters of dry hardwood to produce enough heat, together with the calories of heat produced in the burning body, to completely combust it, to get it to the point that you'd be able to scatter the remains and hide them.
To illustrate the effects of fire to future forensic experts, Liston conducts a hands-on cremation. For the purposes of the exercise, pig cadavers stand in for humans.
In teaching about the cremation process, we can use pigs as a substitute for human remains because the process is very much the same. They'll burn in the same pattern. The amount of bone that survives the cremation process will be the same. And so all around, they're a very useful substitute for a human body. We want to look at a number of things, how long it takes, what happens to the bodies as they're in the burning process, but then also think about, both in an archaeological context and in a forensic context, what it takes to burn a body, because it's actually a lot harder than most people think. A lot of times with murder victims, someone's trying to hide this. They think you can throw a little gasoline on a body and light a match and it goes away. And in fact, of course, it takes a great deal more fuel to burn a body than that.
No matter what kind of fire a killer uses, heat alone is never enough.
In addition, it takes a long time. It's not over quickly. And if you're nervous and anxious about hiding this, and yet it takes 6 to 8 hours to completely burn a, say, 200-pound body, that would become a little nerve-wracking, and there'd be a tendency to put the fire out quickly before the process is finished. To get enough fire to burn the body, there's no way to hide the fire. It would be pretty difficult. Just think how anxious you'd be if you were trying to hide a murder rapidly here and the fire wouldn't light.
More often than not, the remains themselves are still identifiable, providing investigators with plenty of clues.
In a lot of forensic cases, that's what you see, is that about that condition now. And obviously nowhere near destroyed, not something to be easy to hide at all.
Though a body has been burned and charred, many of the injuries will still show up on the bones.
Stab wounds, cut marks, and bullet wounds are all visible on burned bone. One of the bodies we've got that we're burning today was shot in the head, and so we'll be able to look at the burned bullet wound on it. In addition, there are some cut marks that I put on some of the limb bones, and we'll be able to look at those as well.
Even the fire will provide clues for experts. It's all a matter of knowing what to look for. Captain Silvio da Silva has been training firefighters for nearly a decade.
Just about every fire has the potential to involve foul play. So we're, as firefighters and emergency responders, we have to be very conscious that perhaps we may be destroying evidence if we move the wrong thing. And just about every fire that we go to, we tend to think that perhaps there's the possibility that it could be arson. So we have to be very careful and watch for everything.
Different fires burn at different speeds. Firefighters know that accelerants like gasoline will leave behind trailers, betraying their presence.
One of the things that we have on our side is the fact that arsonists sometimes believe that their evidence of setting up that fire has been consumed by the fire. Sometimes if a fire takes place and it's too hot or burns too quickly, sometimes it blows out, it takes the fuel out, so sometimes the evidence remains behind. So you can never really get rid of the evidence.
Even the hottest fire won't entirely burn up a body.
One forensic case I worked on where fire was used to try to hide a murder involved two bodies. It was first thought that perhaps a couch had caught on fire because the people who lived in the house were smokers. We brought the material back to the lab and began to reconstruct the bones, trying to make sure that there were just two people and not any others. And as I began to reconstruct the skull, I started finding an odd breakage pattern and finally realized that there was a bullet hole in the burned skull. And at that point, we realized we were not dealing with just a house fire, but in the fact that it was a murder and an attempt to cover it up.
Making sense of burnt bones is not an easy endeavor. Fire can cause bones to crack and shrink. Damage from the heat can mimic trauma wounds. Bones will also change color and shape.
Sometimes cracks in bones like this can look a lot like a cut mark, and particularly if the bone's really thoroughly burnt, it can be very difficult to sort those out.
After 4 hours of sustained burning, the pig remains are still identifiable.
This is the type of remains you might find in a house fire or a burned car or something like that. While there is calcined bone, there's also a lot of charred soft tissue still. What you've got here is part of the pelvis and then some of the vertebra of one of the cremated pigs.
If these were charred human remains, experts could most likely identify the person, the manner of death, and the cause of death.
It's unlikely that using fire is a really effective way to completely hide a body. It's impossible to totally destroy it. There will always be bone fragments, and unless crushed into tiny powder grains, some of them will still be identifiable. In addition, the metal that is in our teeth, surgical prosthetics, things like that, will also remain.
Once inside the autopsy theater, it's hard to fool the experts.
In order to do this job very well, you have to think dirty. You have to say, now, what is the next thing that I would do if I were a criminal, you see? And if you think with that in mind, very often you can pretty much figure out what he is thinking about and what he is failing to think about.
His feet. Nice work, guys. Nice work.
One of the most enduring clues at any crime scene is blood. Regardless of how well killers think they've cleaned it up, chances are it will never really go away. With the development of new forensic chemicals, experts can now see evidence invisible to the human eye. Richard Bunting and Dave Wieland are forensic identification experts with the Toronto Police.
Glucomalachite green is a chemical process that we use at crime scenes for enhancing and looking for blood that's at crime scenes. We would use it in the sense of a crime scene where there's faint traces of blood or it's hard to see, and we would spray it around trying to find out where that blood has gone, what reaction it has, and it helps us to tell us a little bit more about the scene if we can find the blood.
The chemicals react to minute amounts of protein that blood has left behind. Even if the blood is cleaned up instantly, many surfaces will absorb tiny amounts of the protein. And leucomalachite green will highlight anything that has touched it. Its sensitivity is astounding.
It ranges anywhere from 1 part to 100,000 to 1 part to 1,000,000. That gives you a fairly good range so that you are looking at stuff that is not really readable to the naked eye.
It takes seconds to react. It's almost instantaneous. That was what kind of brought it to the forefront from the forensic community as well. We were looking for something that would give us a quick reaction, but also an accurate reaction with the blood at the scene.
Once the spraying starts, unseen details begin to appear, almost like magic.
Yeah. You can get fingerprints in blood, you can get the ridge detail, you can get all the shoe detail you want, that you can make a positive identification on that treadwear. Any of that stuff could be located there.
Time has little impact on its viability. A scene scrubbed clean years earlier will still light up as if it was yesterday. In a recent case the team worked, the invisible blood trail led police straight to the killer's door.
It was an apartment building type thing where the suspect thought he'd thought of everything. He actually killed the victim in his own apartment, the victim's own place. The suspect wore the victim's slippers, then he took the slippers off and wandered around in sock feet, and then he actually left the apartment and wandered back up to his apartment, which was about 4 floors up. And of course, at first view, you couldn't see anything until we started playing the leucomalachite green. And you could actually see the footprints and see the tread where as he went up the stairs to his apartment, and a search warrant was obtained for his apartment. As a result, he was arrested for the crime.
Clues from a crime scene can be found on almost anything. But until recently, some surfaces guarded a killer's secrets. Evidence on plastic and evidence exposed to the elements were often impossible to process. With the advent of VMD, or vacuum metal deposition, that's all changed. Brian Yamashita is a forensic chemist with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Fortunately for us, a lot of criminals use plastic to wrap up their victims and try and dispose of incriminating evidence and things like that. So when these things are recovered, we can put them in the vacuum metal deposition chamber and treat them with the metal, and many times find fingerprints on the surfaces. But it's also good on things that are old, on things that have been exposed to the elements, and even things that have been treated with other techniques first.
The machine works by evaporating 2 thin layers of gold and zinc onto the exhibit. Each application uses about $1 in gold. First, the gold is melted and evaporates. As it cools, tiny gold particles recondense all over the article, filling in and sticking to any contaminants. When the zinc is vaporized, it attaches to the gold, making the impressions even more visible. The metal coating acts like a glaze, exposing the minutest remnants of sweat, dirt, or blood.
Yeah, Ron, it looks like the hand was deposited this way, in this fashion.
So that's the thumbprint there?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Looks pretty good.
Yeah, 2 fingerprints side by side, so that's maybe index and middle finger or something.
The VMD has also shown promise on other hard-to-treat items like clothing, silks, and even paper towels. But where it really shines is in processing plastic. In a recent high-profile homicide involving young offenders, the VMD provided crucial evidence.
Probably the most amazing case that I was personally involved with was a case where a youth gang ended up kidnapping some other young people. They took them back to an apartment and they started beating them up and treating them pretty badly. They ended up killing one of them during the course of the evening. They'd put a bunch of plastic bags on the floor and on the walls, and they had threatened their victims by saying that the plastic was put on the floor and on the walls in order to make sure there wasn't a mess made when they put the victims into that room. What the police did when they came into the apartment and found the scene, they took the plastic bags off and brought them directly to the RCMP for treatment without doing any other kind of processing for fingerprints. So we ran them through the vacuum metal deposition machine, and we found quite a number of palm prints, fingerprints, and footprints as well, because they'd stepped on the plastic bags as they were on the floor in the storage room. And the detail on some of those prints was quite amazing.
The impressions lifted from the bags identify 3 suspects, as well as the victim. 17-year-old Sylvain Leduc. Unraveling a criminal's attempt at a cover-up requires more than just good tools. It also requires a sharp mind.
I'm the crime scene storyteller. It's my job to go to the scene, have the scene talk to me, give me the explanation of what's happened there. There's little bits and pieces around that are there that can give me the total picture. And then what I do is I put all those bits and pieces together, make up my hypothesis, which is how that crime happened, and it's then my job to go before the court and give that explanation.
Man's cunning can do much to camouflage a crime. Stripping away the lies to find the truth challenges even the most sophisticated forensic science.
Okay, it's fine.
Killers are constantly devising new ways to try and cover up their crimes. Their methods are as elaborate and inventive as the human imagination. So forensic science is always trying to stay one step ahead, developing new technologies to outwit the criminal mind.
Ultimately, criminals think that they can cover this up, they can bury their evidence, they can destroy their evidence, but there is no such thing as a perfect crime. We as human creatures do so many things throughout the day, and those little things will ultimately come back and haunt the criminal. So there's always pieces and parts and significant things that are left at a crime scene that's traceable.
Long after a victim has taken his final breath, his skeletal remains will continue to speak for the dead.
Damage on the skeleton can tell you a lot about how the individual may have died. What we call perimortem trauma, or injuries to the skeleton around the time of death. There's no evidence of healing, but it's clearly damage that's been done to wet or green bone. And so, in this case, impacts from projectiles, but also cut marks, stab wounds, things like that, will all show up on a skeleton.
Inside and out, a body will arm investigators with irrefutable evidence. Evidence about its life and death.
The body never lies, you see. The body is the dead talking to the living. You see, this is what the body does. When the body is presented in an autopsy, the body is talking to us. So what we have to do is to transfer that information to the stories and whatever is garnered through the investigation to see as to whether that's consistent with what the body tells us, because what the body is telling us is the truth.
Yeah, I think the beauty of forensic evidence is it's always there. No matter what the type of crime that happens or how you try to hide it, you still have things you can tell from the body. You still leave that forensic trademark on it that gives us information that we can track it down to you. The trick is for us to find it.
Of course, some killers do get away with murder. Some crimes remain unsolved. But a successful cover-up has more to do with luck than anything else.
You know, there's a saying down at the homicide squad, the answer's in the box. And that's the box of files that relate to every crime scene and every crime. And the answer's in there.
There is no limit to how far killers will go in their attempts to cover up their crimes. But no matter how thorough or inventive the criminal, their luck almost always runs out.